Hello, my name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan, and I have an interesting journey for us today. I want to discuss a topic. It's a theory. It is not fact. I'm not saying this is how things should be. I'm not saying this is how I'm going to go, but it's something I've been working on for quite some time. So ever since the Wisdom of Odin's Reach has made its way to Europe, we've been begged the question of what is Norse paganism in America? Is it Norse paganism, or is it something different? And for the longest time, I kind of shoved it off like, oh, well, of course I'm a Norse pagan. I worship the gods, I follow things like the Poetic Edda, the Have 'em All, I learn from the ancestors, I venerate the Viking times, all those things. But then I really started thinking, and I began to question and began to realize, what if we are not Norse pagan? What if paganism here in America is so different that it itself would be considered its own pathway? Of course, I'm not big on labels and things like that, which is why this isn't something that I'm like, oh, this is, earth-shattering. But at the same time, it's an interesting question, and I want to explore that today with you on this hike. So today, we're going to explore what is it to be a North American pagan.
I think the first thing we have to explore when it comes to this idea of North American paganism is why did the Europeans come here in the first place? And you have to go all the way back to the split between Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. And so essentially, Catholicism is the pagan version of Christianity in a way, just because it really is just a combination of all the different pagan religions put into one. I mean, shoot, you even really have multiple deities in the form of the saints. But due to the corruption and the persecution done by the Catholic Church, the Protestant Reformation happened and basically split the church. And a lot of people had to flee to a new place in order to practice their new Protestant religion. And so with that, people would come to the United States, the New World, so they could practice in peace. Now, obviously, other people came here for other reasons. Business enterprises, escape from, persecution in other ways. But for the most part, the majority, and at least the first people that came over here from Europe, were trying to, practice their Protestant religions in peace. And so I don't know if you've actually ever been to a Protestant church, and I'm not sure, this is probably more rare for my European followers and the European people that watch this video, but Protestant churches are boring. Because yes, the Catholic Church was corrupt, but also it did have some form of history to it. And so they come here and basically denounce all that Catholic history and kind of go on their own way. And therefore, the churches kind of lost their culture and soul. These giant cathedrals of beauty and of sacred relics turned into these square rooms of just people. And so, yes, you can just have people to, follow the religion, but you lost all the history. And I think that is a cornerstone of what is wrong with American culture, is that a lot of people coming over here, again, not the majority, but a lot of people were coming here to cast aside the life they used to live. So for my family, for instance, we can only go back to about 1880. We suspect we've been here since about 1820, 1830. And there are rumors of my family that had a family shield of some kind, or we did have some form of relic that got destroyed and or sold when they got here. And essentially, we don't know exactly where my family from, at least not directly. We know a little bit of my mother's side as far as the English and Irish influences, obviously. But as far as my father's side, we really don't know, because with that theme of coming here to cast aside the past, that's what a lot of people did. In fact, my last name is completely made up. It didn't exist before a certain point. And so it's really interesting to see what this has done to American society, because for a long time, I think it was this idea of, America's number one, America's the new world, the number one in everything. And I feel like that became people's religion. Yes, there was church and people went to church, but really the religion of North America, the religion of the United States, became America. And, as much as that sounds funny, I think it's true. We were kicking butt all the way up through, 1940, and really World War II seems to be the turning point. That was the high point of American pride. And then it started going downhill. I don't know if it's because of political corruption, because of societal trends, but it seems like around 1940, 1950, around this high time is when everything started going south for the American identity. And sure enough, you saw, the hippie generation came out, and with that hippie generation came different ideas of spirituality. This was when people started to really come out and think alternatively to why are we here, started to explore themselves more as far as their conscious, as far as their own soul. And so this is when a lot of pagan religions really started to pick up, and this is also where we see Asatru start forming in Iceland and here in the United States. And the reason I think this is because we weren't number one anymore. We were starting to we reached that climax of our purpose as the United States and as American people. And so I feel like people started looking for answers otherwise. We completed the goal. We cast aside the Catholic Church. We threw away our European ancestry, and all of a sudden we realized that culture was important and heritage in the past. And I feel like that's what a lot of people come to, specifically Norse paganism, about, is they're seeking some form of cultural connection. They are missing their roots. I mean, once you remove the roots of the tree, it has no more nutrients. And it's the same way with who we are as people, is once we cut out the roots, what are we? And so I think that's what a lot of pagan movements are, is discovering our roots, but also discovering where our branches can go. When people say that America is a melting pot of people, it's true. I mean, anyone in America that has been here since like the 1800s, early 1900s, you look at their DNA and they're going to be made up of everything. I'm sure I'm 5% of that, 5% of this, 5% of that, because it doesn't take long for all the different people coming here to spread their genes, to spread their, where they're from. And so we are this weird mutt people without a home. And when we lost the American dream, we lost who we were. And so now we're really trying to seek that. So at least that's my experience as a person living in America, a person trying to find who they are. And that's when I found the roots of European spirituality. And that's why I started seeking it. While it's actually really hard to move from this really beautiful spot, I do want to talk about a few other things, because this isn't the only component to what we are. So I do want to explore the three concepts I always talk about of paganism, the gods, the folk, and the spirits. So I want to explore that a little bit more. So I'm going to actually pack up my gear and head down the trail, and we'll talk about what makes Norse paganism, and why that might mean that we ourselves are North American pagans. All right, let's move on the trail. Say goodbye. Absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
Now, the reason I use the God, folk, spirit thing is, I've been using it for a long time, but really, to me, to define paganism, to really dig into it, I think you need to look at what gods are worshipped, what people are venerated, and what land is it worshipped on, and what land is celebrated in the practice. And so let's talk about land, because obviously America has its beauty. And while I have my critiques of living in America, it's hard to deny the absolute beauty of the land that we live in. At least where I live. I know that there are states that are not that interesting, particularly a lot of the plain states tend to not have things like this. But that's kind of the beauty of North America in general as just land, is we have almost every biome on the planet here. We have forests like this, but we also have, I forget the actual, deciduous and coniferous. Deciduous and coniferous, right? Those are the two forests, I believe. Yeah, so we have both of those. We have both types of forests here. We also have tropical zones, we have swamps, we have beaches, we have mountains, we have plains, we have deserts. We have, places that get feet of snow every year. We have places that get no snow every year. And, basically any type of biome you want to live in is available to people here in North America and specifically the United States. Now, one piece of land, of course, I talk about is the Appalachia region. And what most people might not know is that this is one of the oldest mountain chains in the world. And the reason that the mountains are smaller than, say, like the Rockies or even like the European Alps is because they are so old and they've been so eroded. But there is old magic here. And I hope that through my videos you've been able to see some of that old magic, especially in places like this. The reason streams and waterfalls like this exist is because of constant erosion and just water running through it, and you get these cascades and these levels. There is something truly old and ancient here. And so the land here is different. It is specific to North America. Don't get me wrong. I want to go to the fjords of Norway and see the highlands of Sweden and see the lowlands of Denmark and the oceans around them. But at the same time, the land here is my home. This is where I've grown up, and Kentucky is where I spent the last 8 years of my adult life. Yeah, 8 years. Kentucky is where I have discovered the old ways and the old gods. So when looking at, what paganism you follow or what is paganism, I would say yes, the land in North America is very different. And the spirits that we interact with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis are different spirits. And I would say they're very powerful and very knowledgeable. Yes, land is different. So, but of course we look at the gods. Okay, the gods, right? I still worship Odin. I still follow, Thor and Freyr and Freya, and Njord and all these other gods that I'm becoming introduced to. So yeah, the gods are the same. That's really one of the only connections we can really, dig our hands into with people that do worship these gods in Norway and Sweden and Denmark. So when looking at like the land is different, but the gods are the same. So it ends up putting us in this very strange spot. So the next thing we have to look at is the community, the folk, the ancestors. What people do we venerate? Are those the same as someone that would come from Norway or Sweden? And again, not really. Like I said, that we're this weird hodgepodge of so many different communities, so many different nationalities and ethnicities. I mean, Americans are mutts. We are a little bit of everything. We've kind of become our own thing. Like, we're just American. And so that begs the question of who do we venerate? What ancestors do we venerate? Especially, most family that I know have lived and died are Christian, are Protestant Christians. And so it leaves us again in a very strange spot that it's hard to look back past Christianity and say, well, I'm going to venerate this ancestor because clearly they were pagan. And it's hard to lock down who that would be. I've talked to people in Europe that are like, oh, I know where my family came from all the way back to the 1300s. I'm like, that's insane. I mean, that is such a crazy concept to us here. And so I don't know, it's really hard to lock down what our ancestry is and really connect to those roots. Where that kind of leaves us is that we're the first generation or second generation really of people trying to bring back the old ways here in North America, specifically the United States. So we're having to create our own traditions. We don't have fathers and grandfathers to tell us how we practice this faith. So we have to create our own traditions. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. And the traditions here are going to be different. The traditions that we create within even the Wisdom of Odin community, we have silly traditions, but at the same time, they're beginning to see themselves, replayed through various gatherings and through various groups. Our stories and our legends and our heroes are going to be different in this community. We as North Americans are in a strange spot with paganism. We connect to things that people have done as far as the Norse Paganism and, and even Wicca, a lot of people connect to here. And then all those things intermingle just like who we are as people to create what we follow. While yes, we venerate like mostly Norse gods at a ritual here in, Kentucky, at the same time, the rituals we perform are going to be vastly different than rituals in Europe. But does that make them wrong? Does that make what we do not special? And these are the kind of questions that I'm beginning to ask myself as we go into the future of this community and the future of paganism here in America. So one aspect that is very hard to talk about is the Native American connection to the land. So obviously the land here was watched over and cared for thousands of years by the Native American tribes. And we have to own up to the fact that the American culture and society cannibalized what they did, kicked them out, stole their land, and killed their people. And so again, that leaves us in a very strange spot, because I want to come here and hail this river, and I want to go into these mountains and call to these ancient spirits, but these might be the same ancient spirits that Native American tribes called to. If there's one thing that I think that Native American, traditional religion can follow with Norse paganism or paganism in general, is that we venerate the land. I really want to nurture that connection, and I've been trying to reach out to Native American tribes, and I mean, shoot, we have people who have Native American descent within our community that worship the Norse gods. So it's definitely a pathway that I want to follow, because it is part of our story as North American pagans. I don't have an answer for how to heal those bonds and heal that connection or how to handle these things. I just know that the Native American tribes and the spirituality that they practice is a part of our story. So I just have one more thing I want to talk about. It's more of a lighthearted thing, so I'm going to head up the trail to talk about it a little bit. But let us say goodbye once again to such a beautiful spot here in Kentucky. Here is where I would like to end this video, because we're going to talk about shouting and why it seems like, at least in the Wisdom of Odin community and what I've experienced with the pagan community here in general, is that we are quite aggressive in how we worship the gods, how we venerate the gods, how we shout their names to the heavens. I think we actually have to look at what we've talked about in this episode already. We were, I don't want to use the word oppressed, but held back from our spiritual practice for so long. For the over 200 years of American history, we were this Protestant religion that was very reserved, that wasn't very loud. I mean, yes, you have your Southern Baptists, but that is not the majority of people that practice Christianity in America. And I find that church is just boring. Like, there's not exhilarating. It doesn't make you feel excited to be alive. You just worry about your death. So I feel as Americans that we were tired of just worrying about death, and we were ready to celebrate life. And so what better way to celebrate life than to be a little loud about it? So I believe that's one reason. I think another reason is because of the land. The land itself did not have people to venerate it, did not have people to honor it. For over 200 years, we removed the people that did that, the people that cared for it, the people that came to places like this and said, "Hail the spirit that lives here." And so I feel the land itself gives us a little bit of zeal, gives us a little bit of a bump, because I'm in a place like this and I just feel it. I feel that energy coming from the land. And so I think that also comes into play. And to me, it's just been such a natural process. When we go to these gatherings, you know, I say, "Hail Odin," and everyone's like, "Hail Odin!" And it's just hard to stop people from doing that. Now, it does have a limit, like everything in moderation, and we've had problems, and we address these problems where people, you know, just will out of nowhere in the middle of a very sacred ritual go like, "Odin!" out of nowhere, even though it's not an Odin ritual. So we have our limits on that as far as like my community and what we do. And quite frankly, what I choose to record is usually the loud bits, the more sacred, quiet rituals. I don't tend to record, or at least not to some length. One, because, you know, they're sacred. I feel like they should be a little bit more somber and they don't need someone running around with the camera. Two, because I want to feel that connection. And three, because quite frankly, it's not that entertaining to watch. It's sacred and meaningful if you're there, but transferring over a lens, it's really not that powerful. So there's a lot of factors into why we are loud, why we seem loud, or at least the people that I interact seem loud. But quite frankly, I'm a little bit loud because I come to a place like this and I didn't ever feel connected to a place like this when I was young, when I was out in nature. My family was this whole like, oh, let's just drive by and do a scenic route. They didn't want to actually take the journey, take a 2-hour hike through the mud to come to a place like this. And so maybe we are different as North American pagans. Maybe we are. But what matters to me, I don't give a crap about labels. I don't really care. I care about coming to a place like this and feeling the energy. I mean, feeling the energy off these walls, feeling the energy of the water, the cascades, feeling the gods within this area as well. That's what I care about. I couldn't care less about what we call ourselves. What matters to me is that this makes me feel alive, and that I want to find other people that want to come to places like this and feel alive. And I think that's what we really are becoming. Yes, I worship the Norse gods. I'm not really trying to sit down and have this somber moment. I want to feel this. And when I feel this, I can't help it. Now, part of my practice, most of my personal practice is just sitting in front of the altar, thinking about the gods, thinking about how I can work on myself, meditation, trance work. Those things aren't necessarily loud. But when you come to a place like this, how can you not be loud is what I'm asking. So thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope I've been able to teach you something. I hope it's drawn some interesting conclusions. If you have anything to share, please share it down below with us. But truly, welcome to the climax of this video. Welcome to this beautiful waterfall. And folk, until the hall, Skål.